Hey, it's Ryan with this week's Mille Lacs Fishing Report. It's early June and main lake water temps are in the upper 50s, the bays are in the lower 60s. Last weekend we were blessed with some excellent weather out here on Mille Lacs, and it looks like that trend is going to continue. I'm seeing lows in the lower 60s at night and highs in the lower 80s during the day. So we're forecasted for some beautiful weather this weekend. It's going to be a great weekend to be up on Mille Lacs. We get started with the walleye bite. There's a few different walleye bites going on. Some of them are a little bit conditions dependent, and some of them are going to be a little bit based on timing. They're going to continue to get better and better as the season progresses. But we'll start with the best first, and that's the evening bobber bite. There's a great shallow water bobber bite going right now, just bobber and a leech at sunset, 8 to 12 feet of water on the rocks. There's a lot of people doing really well with that, and that's going to continue for a couple more weeks. Another bite that's been doing well is just the shallower rocks when you have some overcast or you have some wind. A little paddle tail swim bait casted on large rock or rock to gravel transitions in about that 12 foot of water range is a great way to catch walleyes out here during the day when the conditions are right, and it's a great way to put keepers in the box too. A couple of bites that are going to continue to get better out here are going to be the gravel bite and the mud bite. Those are a couple things I've been checking up on more and more lately, and I'm seeing more fish show up in those areas, but they're still not stacked yet. What I have noticed is we are starting to get more bug hatches right now, so I expect the fish to be moving out there shortly. When fishing the gravel in June, one of the best techniques during the daytime is to get a spinner and a night crawler and fish the mud to gravel transitions. And you're going to find those in roughly 30 feet of water where the mud and the gravel meet. Running a spinner and crawler around there during the day is a great way to put a number of fish in the boat when they're feeding heavily in June. The spinner and crawler can also be used on the edge of the mud flats, but oftentimes I prefer to go with a Lindy rig and a leech, especially a jumbo leech when I'm fishing the mud flats. When I'm on the flats, I tend to fish a lot more deliberately. You'll notice that when you're on the edge of the flats, especially ones that have a sharper drop, you find these erosions running down the sides of the flats, and a lot of times you'll find fish are parked in each one of those erosions, or sometimes more than one fish will be in each one of those erosions. Using a Lindy rig and a leech, you can really pick those areas apart. You can pick the points apart. You don't need to cover a lot of water like you kind of tend to want to out on the gravel. You can just cover good water much more thoroughly with the Lindy rig and the leech out on the mud flats. In the evening on the gravel, one of my favorite things to do is to get away from the transitions and just go right up to the top of the gravel bar. You just go right up there with a bobber and a leech. You can either go hit the high point wherever the very top of the gravel bar is, or another thing I like to do is use my side imaging and try to find some rocks that are up there. A lot of times you're not going to find a real distinct rock pile on top of the gravel bar, but oftentimes you'll find a couple scattered larger rocks, and those can sometimes be sweet spots for that evening bobber bite. When fishing on the mud in the evening, what I typically try to do is I try to find a point. I like to either find a point or I like to find like an inside turn that gradually leads up into the mud flat, almost works like a funnel leading up onto the top of the mud flat. Or the third thing I do is I just drive around with the sonar until I find the biggest concentration of fish I can. Either way, whether it's a point or kind of a funnel leading up on the flat or just simply marking as many fish as you can and anchoring up on one of those three locations, you just park your boat, throw your bobber out in any one of those three spots, and in June on Mille Lacs with a bobber and a leech, you should be able to catch fish at sunset. Moving on to the smallmouth, we are in a period of transition. There is still the pre-spawn bite going on. There's still a lot of pre-spawn fish out in the lake. We are just scratching the surface of the spawn at this point, but things are moving fast. And whenever you have a late spring like we did this year, where you may have people saying, oh, we're 3 weeks behind. You may be 3 weeks behind at one point, but sometimes it only takes a couple days to catch up. And we're kind of at that stage right now. The weather's been so nice lately that we are catching up quickly and beds are popping up like crazy on the lake. So even though we are still just scratching the surface of the spawn, it's moving fast at this point. For those of you who want to target pre-spawn fish, Ned rig fished along large rock spines or large boulders is a great way to catch big fish. Or just one of my favorites during the pre-spawn is a little paddle tail swim bait. Cast those out, bump them into the larger structures down there. It's a great way to catch big fish. It's also a great way to cover water too. For those of you who want to fish beds, start looking shallow. 3 to 5 feet of water is a great area to look for bass beds. What I generally fish when I'm fishing beds is one of two things. I'm either using a Ned rig or I'm using a drop shot. And I see some people like to use some pretty heavy duty equipment on beds. I'm telling you right now, bass will eat whatever you put on the bed. So you don't need like a 5/0 jig. You don't need to hammer them and tear their face apart. Just a simple little hook, a little drop shot hook, a little Ned rig. Pop, you get the fish, reel them up, throw them back right away. Try to get them back in the water as soon as possible. Those fish have a lot of work to do down there, so have your fun with them, but make sure you get them back in the water quickly and try to do as little damage as possible. As far as baits for the Ned rig and drop shot, you know, the Ned rig's pretty self-explanatory, just a little green pumpkin Ned rig. Drop shot, little green pumpkin worm works well. If you're having trouble knowing whether you're in the bed or not, because getting into the bed is the key to getting the fish to bite quickly, if you're having trouble knowing whether you're in the bed, you can use a white bait because these fish will hit pretty much anything when they're on a bed. So color isn't all that important. It may make a bit of difference on how quickly they eat your bait, but they'll eventually eat it. So a white bait will sometimes be a very good indicator to you so you can see whether your lure is actually in the bed or not. So green pumpkin, if you know what you're doing. If you want to be able to see what you're doing, a white bait works really well. Like I said, the bass are a lot of fun on the beds, but make sure you get them back into the water quickly. They've got a lot of work to do down there. I hope these tips help you out and help you catch more fish, and have a great weekend.